After a few years' hiatus, piracy has reared its ugly head yet again. There are 31 incidents of pirate attacks in 2019 alone, the highest in the last 4 years. And more than 10 attacks have been recorded since the beginning of this year.
At this point of time, they are very well coordinated. They have a method to their madness.
We are not going to give a tolerance to the action like this, because this is against the credibility of the government of Indonesia.
But what has led to the resurgence of pirate attacks in the region? Is it the result of economic hardship or the lack of political will?
Maybe they have lost their job, they need to support their family and couldn't get a job, and so a quick fix will be robbing.
With the COVID-19 outbreak taking its toll on the economies of this region, will these attacks take a sharp turn for the worse? Will they evolve from petty theft into more sophisticated crimes of kidnapping for ransom and extortions? When the world thinks of piracy, what comes to mind is the fractured, violent and ungovernable African state of Somalia. The Somali coast was regarded as one of the most dangerous sea passages in the world. The area provided rich pickings for pirates who launched brazen attacks on commercial ships passing through its long coastlines. Not anymore. Today, Asia has gained the reputation for being one of the pirate-infested regions of the world. Each year, more than 120,000 ships traverse these strategic waterways. It stretches from the westernmost corner of Malaysia to the tip of Indonesia's Bintan Island, the Malacca and Singapore Straits, carrying more than a third of the world's traded goods. The most congested shipping lane on the planet, however, is also a piracy hotspot.
Piracy is sometimes referred to as the world's second oldest profession, which is simply to say that it has a very long history, one that goes back even before we really have recorded history. So the first sort of substantial reports of piracy, or what we would call maritime piracy today, are in many ways the result of traders and travelers coming through the region and coming under either attack or raids by various sort of local communities or littoral communities. Colonial powers they were able to suppress, but never able to fully eradicate piracy. And littoral states today face much the same problem. Many of the factors that are conducive to piracy and make it so difficult to try and eradicate are the region's unique geography.
One of the reasons why piracy continues to flourish in this part of the world is simply the amount of traffic that passes through the Singapore and the Malacca Straits. Yes, so roughly 40% of the world's trade passes through these waters. And at any one point of time, you will have about 1,000 vessels in the Singapore Strait alone. So I think this presents a lot of opportunity that is very hard to resist.
56-year-old Bajo is a former pirate who hails from Bilakang Padang, one of the small islands of Batam. Out of work and the means to earn a regular income, he turned to piracy as a solution to his financial problems. Bajo was often on the run from the authorities at the time of increased surveillance. But he would only return to Bilakang Padang once he felt it safe enough to launch another attack, especially during moonless nights. He and his accomplices would attack 4 ships in a month.
Terus udah gitu, ya udah tepat pada waktunya, ya kami siapkan alat-alat perlengkapan untuk melakukan, ya seperti linggis, obeng, parang, palu. Sasaran utamanya ya uang. Ya keduanya apa-apa yang ada Tapi tidak seluruh kapal yang barang-barang kapal yang perlunya aja. Apa yang ada di kamar kapten aja itulah yang kami ambil. Di jam atau ada barang emas itu aja. Apa yang ada tidak di tangan kapten itu aja. Bisa jam tangan, apa ada cincin, lain pada itu tak ada. Itu tidak bisa kita tentukan. Kadang-kadang ada juga kita tidak ada naiknya. Kadang-kadang kita dapat. Dapatnya pun kita tidak tentu juga. Ada yang dapat belasan ribu, ada juga 8.000.
Since the beginning of this year, there have been at least 13 pirate attacks on ships plying the region's waterways. Such incidents have sent shockwaves through the shipping industry, which has witnessed a sudden spike in piracy incidents in 2019. More than 30 vessels were targeted last year, from just 8 the year before. Most attacks happened along the narrow channel that separates Singapore from Indonesia.
Singapore Straits comprises of 3 countries' water, the Singapore waters, Indonesian waters, as well as the Malaysian waters. And like any other highways on the road, the Singapore Straits also have highways. And traffic that comes from the east to west will travel along this line, and west to east to the lower half of the Singapore Straits. What you see here is the sea robbery incidents that occurs over the last few months. And most of the incidents occur in 2 locations that we have observed. One in the Phillip Channel in the east of Karimun, as well as to the north of Batam.
The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea defines piracy as any act of violence or detention committed for private ends in a place outside the jurisdiction of any state. On the other hand, armed robberies take place in a state's internal waters. But for seafarers, these definitions mean little to them.
For the people working on the ships, the seafarers, when they have someone coming on board with a weapon that's threatening their safety, of course, they're not so concerned about definitions. Whereas technically it is armed robbery and theft, for them, it's a vulnerability of violence. So for some people, the definition is less important than for others.
Traveling at a speed of up to 5 knots or around 9 kilometers an hour, vessels such as tugs and barges have to carefully navigate the congested waterway, especially along the Singapore Strait. These slow-moving vessels have often become easy targets for the pirates who ride on speedboats and motorized sampans. The pirates then board the vessels, threaten the crew, and then escape with cash, scrap metal, and engine parts. Although there are no reports of kidnapping for ransom so far, the recent attacks on 2 tankers have served as a warning of a potential shift in the pirates' modus operandi.
In the Singapore Strait, for the longest time, perpetrators were mostly unarmed or they were only armed with knives. But as we have seen in October 2019, there was an incident whereby someone carried a firearm, although the firearm was fortunately not discharged. So to me, the fact that a perpetrator is brazen enough to bring a firearm on board one of their expeditions in the Singapore Strait is a sign that things could get a lot worse if we let our guard down.
At its narrowest point, the Strait of Singapore is only about 2.7 kilometers wide. The passage allows pirates to move in and out of Singapore and into Indonesian waters easily, playing a cat-and-mouse game with the authorities. Security analysts say pirates often launch their attacks from the Indonesian island of Batam and other smaller islands across the border from Singapore. Former pirates like Wak Bojo knew exactly what they were looking for. He says that they often go after the crew members' belongings or any cash found on board the ship.
Terus sasarannya naik ke kapten. Sampai ke kapten, kalau jumpa kapten ya kita sandra. Sandra kapten, minta kapten buang. Kapten pun bawa ke kamar. Sampai kamar itu ya, kalau dia bisa buka piring kas kita buka, kalau bisa buka kita bawa turun.
More than 80,000 vessels pass through the Straits of Malacca and Singapore every year, bringing goods to the Middle East and Europe via the Indian Ocean, making them rich pickings for marauding pirates who steal whatever they could lay their hands on, including cash, oil, and supplies worth millions of dollars. Preventing attacks on ships plying these critical sea lanes will help protect the nation of its critical supplies.
The Straits of Malacca and Singapore is an important maritime choke point because the energy then transported through this choke point is almost as high as in like the Straits of Hormuz in the Middle East. And any disruption to this maritime choke point will have catastrophic effect where it will lead to the rise of energy costs. So such choke points are important for us to protect.
Pirate attacks can happen in the middle of the night or even during the day. Hence the need for constant vigilance at all times.
For example, in one of these incidents, a bulk carrier by the name of Sam Jaguar was targeted by sea robbers in the middle of the night. And because we received this information from the vessels, we immediately provided operational queuing to the Indonesian IRO and the relevant local authorities and led to the arrest of the 3 perpetrators on board this ship.
They know that vessels that are coming to Singapore are loaded, put it this way. They are loaded as in could be fuel, could be equipments and all that. And Singapore being a country where many vessels pass through, it becomes a target, especially along the sea lanes and so on.
According to Ron Malaravan, who runs a company that provides protection to vessels, more than 20 attacks happened in the Strait of Malacca between September and December 2019. The incidents usually took place between 2 and 6 a.m. But many of these attacks have gone under the radar.
Many will go unreported because the shipping companies do not want to be identified because it affects the business, and they would lose clients, subsequent clients. So that could be one of the factors why they are not reporting.
Companies don't want their vessels to be seen as vessels that are commonly boarded by thieves and armed robbers. There's even the reputation of the shipmaster that he failed to protect his own vessel. Then there's the consideration, as you mentioned, with delay, that if you make the report, that might lead to an investigation with interviews of everybody on board, collection of evidence. So that would put the ship off schedule.
According to the official figures, a total of 104 attacks were conducted in 2015. 5 in the Strait of Malacca, 99 in the Strait of Singapore. In 2016, the attacks dropped sharply to 2, but then jumped to 9 in 2017. Piracy incidents fell slightly to 8 in 2018, before creeping up to 31 in 2019.
As we saw in 2015, when we had more than 100 incidents within that calendar year, that's when the coastal states really improved their efforts to combat the situation. And for example, on the Indonesian side, there were 2 agencies involved. First, the federal agencies went in and they found 2 gangs on Karimun Island, and many arrests were made. The Indonesian Navy also engaged with the local community to try to create an understanding that it was better to pursue legal means of income as opposed to pursuing criminal activities at sea.
But has there been a resurgence of piracy activities of late? Is enough being done to deal with the problem? And who really are these criminals?
You have such an economic gap between the two different islands, Indonesia and then Singapore, so they can be, let's say, frustrated, bitter, and so that's why the economic issue is a big, main factor for them to move to piracy.
Batam, Indonesia. Located just 30 kilometers south of Singapore, is part of a chain of more than 1,000 islands that make up the Riau Islands province. Once a poster boy for foreign investment, the island's economic fortune has declined in recent years. And now, with the deadly COVID-19 crisis wreaking havoc on the region's economies, the island is struggling under the strain of the coronavirus outbreak. The outbreak has not only driven tourists away, it has also hit the economy hard. And as the economy turns sour, financial hardship may force people to commit crimes. And that's exactly what happened to Wak Bajo, who became a pirate at a relatively young age. To him, it's normal for people like him to turn to piracy, as it provided an avenue or an easy way out of their financial difficulties.
Kalau dulu kami 7, tak 8. 2 di boat, 1 tekong, 1 tukang pegang tali, 5 naik. Kalau dapat uang ya, saya pulang ke Jawa. Belum ada pukarnya pikiran untuk apa, yang jelasnya enjoy gitu, happy. Minum, perempuan, daripada uang sekarang, uang itu pun kemana-mana pun kita tidak tahu.
Wak Bajo still looks at Singapore's rapid development with envy. Although Batam is a mere 45 minutes away from Singapore by ferry ride, they're like two worlds apart in terms of levels of development. Even until today, piracy attacks continue to happen right on Singapore's doorstep due to the increasingly lucrative cargoes that pass through the narrow sea lanes.
Ya bedanya ya bangunan-bangunan Singapura megah. Oh, jauh sekali lah Pak. Dari mata uang aja udah kalah kita.
Some analysts believe that many of these pirates are former port workers who are familiar with the trade and know the area pretty well. Some are vessel repairmen who have lost their jobs. They know which vessels to attack and when these attacks can be conducted. Engine spare parts, cash and scrap metal are their primary targets.
Many of the people involved in these attacks are retrenched shipyard workers from Batam working together with some of the water taxi operators. And they have the advantage that because of their profession, they're familiar with the layout of a cargo ship. They know where to get the spare parts and supplies that they can remove and sell and convert to cash.
I have seen the kind of things that they take from the ships, the kind of machinery, spare parts. Those are not just simple spare parts. They require some sort of knowledge to remove, technical knowledge, to remove the spare part from those engines, and also how to dispose this. You know, the modus operandi of taking a spare part from a ship, you can't just sell it on carousel, for example. You must know where you can safely dispose it for a monetary gain. So that's the alternative theory that I would like to offer, that it's not just opportunistic in nature. There is evidence to show that these perpetrators are coordinated. There is a planned method behind their attacks.
Indonesia's only free trade zone, Batam, was once the darling of investors. It has attracted migrants from various corners of the Indonesian archipelago. Tourists, mainly from Singapore and China, have flocked to Batam and the nearby islands for its pristine beaches as well as for leisure. But its once thriving shipping and tourism industries are now in tatters as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak.
Kalau di Batam itu lebih kurang tadi 6.
Tapi saya yakin bahwa akibat ini paling tinggal 3 saja. Begitu ada virus ini, semua negara nggak bisa masuk. Yang paling terdampak pertama kali yang terpukul adalah sektor pariwisata. Jadi boleh dikatakan semua yang namanya travel kosong, bukan sedikit lagi, langsung kosong. Kemudian yang hotel-hotel itu turun tinggal antara 10 sampai 15%. Ini wabah nasional yang sangat dahsyat sekali. Bahkan negara pun saya lihat sedikit kelabakan gitu loh. Ya, walaupun kita waspada dan berusaha tidak panik. Dan ini sama dengan pengusaha kita. Kita sekarang hanya berusaha untuk bertahan sebaik mungkin, tidak membahayakan karyawan.
Across Indonesia, some 500 people have died from COVID-19, the highest in Southeast Asia. In Batam, ferry operators are forced to reduce services between the island and Singapore. Before the outbreak, Riau Islands was ranked second after Bali in terms of tourist arrivals. In 2019, the province attracted some 2.6 million visitors. Almost half of them are from Singapore. Now, there are deep fears over massive job losses as COVID-19 takes its toll on the economy, and that could lead to a possible spike in piracy activities.
The prospect for this activity to continue comes down to the factors that drive crime in the first place. As long as there's a degree of unemployment on Batam or the neighboring islands of Batam, the people who are unemployed, who see the vessels, whether it's a barge with scrap or a merchant ship with spare parts and supplies that they can convert to cash, these crimes will continue.
Iya takut juga, tapi kan di dalam kapal itu kan kalau kita naik kan kita lihat dulu situasi di kapal seperti apa. Nah, terus kalau tidak ada orang kami naik. Nah, kalau naik tidak ketahuan ya kami langsung sandar kapten. Tapi apabila kalau waktu kami mau naik itu ketahuan dengan orang kapal, kami tidak jadi naik. Ya kita lihat kalau kapal yang kita pilih kita bagus, rendah, yang bisa kita jangkau kita naik. Kalau tidak bisa kita kapalnya tinggi, kita tidak naik.
The Straits of Malacca and Singapore are a 1,000-kilometer strategic waterway that links Asia with the rest of the world. So far, more than 10 pirate attacks have been recorded since the beginning of this year, mostly along the narrow channel that separates Singapore from Indonesia. Is Batam's declining fortunes the main reason behind these attacks?
I think it is individuals who maybe they have lost their job, they need to support their family, and couldn't get a job, and so a quick fix will be robbing. And if you have robbery, if you rob a ship, of course the money is good, I believe, and that could be a driving factor. But I'm not too sure whether it is entirely due to poverty.
Some analysts believe that the lack of enforcement by the Indonesian Navy could have contributed to the spike. And that happened due to the rising tensions in the North Natuna Sea between China and Indonesia. As a result, Indonesia had prioritized the deployment of its fleet to the territorial standoff with China, instead of committing additional resources to combat acts of piracy in the Singapore Strait.
As I understand it, the spike happened at the point of time when the patrol vessels that were normally used to patrol the Singapore Straits were being reassigned to other fleets during that time. And also, I would like to highlight a little political situation that has emerged around the time of the spike, which is China's a bit more aggressive posture in the South China Sea, more specifically around this cluster of islands known as the Natuna Islands. So the peculiar thing here is that the armada that is in charge of security in the Singapore Strait is also in charge of security around the Natuna Islands region. So if I were again a resource allocator of our commander of that particular armada, where will I be deploying my vessels?
In January, President Joko Widodo visited the Natuna Islands in the South China Sea, following a standoff between Indonesian and Chinese vessels there. The confrontation started in the middle of December when a Chinese Coast Guard and fishing boats entered Indonesia's exclusive economic zone. That prompted Jakarta to summon China's ambassador. The dispute has soured Indonesia's relations with China, its biggest trading partner. Indonesia's Minister for Maritime Affairs, Luhut Panjaitan, however, said that the country will pull out all the stops to safeguard its territory and keep the pirates at bay.
We are not going to give a tolerance to the action like this, because this is against the credibility of the government of Indonesia. Trust me, we're not going to tolerate about this one. We're not going to give them room to maneuver in this area.
But there's one burning question. Is securing the narrow strait that separates Indonesia and Singapore a top priority for Jakarta?
Just because it's the Strait of Singapore does not mean that it solely belongs to Singapore waters. Yeah? If the strait were to be known as something else, for example, the Strait of Batam, for example, I think there will be a lot more political will in Jakarta to be deploying resources in order to maintain the name. It does not make a very good headline, for example, if there was a piracy spike in the Strait of Batam. So unfortunately, it is what it is. Yeah, I think there's a lack of urgency in Jakarta because of the lack of political will.
Will the situation in the Malacca and Singapore Straits get worse from now on? For centuries, Southeast Asia has been plagued by pirates who target merchant ships and shipping vessels plying the narrow and congested Malacca and Singapore Straits. In fact, the region has gained the reputation of being one of the global hotspots of piracy. And it's all largely driven by poverty and high unemployment. As the economy slows, the spectre of piracy is likely to hover over these coastal regions for the foreseeable future.
Maritime piracy, although it is a problem that is happening on the water, it is a problem that begins on land. And the reason why people turn to piracy is because usually there is not enough economic activity on land to sustain their livelihoods. So with the slowdown of manufacturing activity worldwide, I think Batam will be severely impacted because of its strong manufacturing base. Yeah, I think once the economy slows down, we can expect to see a spike in the number of piracy cases, especially from in this region.
Local negative economic shocks or economic downturns definitely can have a localized effect in terms of an uptick in piracy, such as we see in and around Batam in the Singapore Straits.
And the economic situation is expected to get worse following the COVID-19 outbreak. The World Bank has warned that the region will be hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. Millions of people could be thrown into poverty, including Indonesia, following a steep contraction of the economy as a result of the virus scare. Growth in other ASEAN countries like the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore and Thailand are also expected to slip into negative territory. With more than 50 million workers being employed in the informal sector in Southeast Asia's largest economy, their future has now become increasingly uncertain. Even now, Wakabajo is struggling to make ends meet due to the deep plunge in the number of tourist arrivals in the island. He now operates a water taxi serving Batam and the nearby islands, but his income has dropped sharply because of the outbreak.
Udah jelas, Pak. Orang tua tak bisa berjalan, takut mau kemana-mana. Jadi bisa katakan kami sekarang ini 3 hari baru 1 kali jalan. Potong minyak 40.000. Ya kita minum ngopi kita dapat 130.000. Kita dapat 130.000, potong minyak 40.000, tinggal 90.000. Kita belum kopi lagi. Jadi berapa kita harus bawa kembalikan dengan rumah? Itulah yang tak bisa orang rumah yang kita makan satu keluarga. Gitu. Jadi macam mana kita mau cari kalau kita diam di rumah? Biaya kita kan besar di kehidupan.
There are concerns that former pirates could return to their old profession once they're no longer able to sustain themselves under the current economic environment. In March this year, the Singapore and Indonesian navies foiled a robbery attempt by pirates in the Strait of Singapore. The thieves had boarded Liberian-flagged bulk carrier Sam Jaguar in the waters east of Pulau Karimun Kecil near Batam. 3 pirates were arrested. Their speedboat was confiscated.
2 di antaranya dia adalah penjahat kambukan. Tahun 2015 melakukan kegiatan yang sama dan di tahun 2018 mereka keluar dari penjara. Terus kemudian mereka melakukan aktivitas yang sama juga. Ya, oleh karena itu saya sepakat dengan aparat TNI, Polri yang ada di Tanjung Balai Karimun ke depan kita melaksanakan tindakan tegas.
But judging from the number of attacks so far this year, the pirates seem to be one step ahead of the authorities. Insufficient patrols and enforcement have led to an uptick in piracy attacks.
There's another factor, aside from the economic side, is the law enforcement. And so if patrols can be arranged to protect the ships, and if the people committing the crimes are arrested, then we have a chance to contain the problem before it spirals out of control.
I do think that Indonesia has an important role to play, and indeed, right, the most important role they can play is actively attempting to suppress piracy that may be coming from Indonesian islands, or that pirates that may be operating out of territories over which they claim sovereignty.
Indonesia has promised to deploy more resources to deal with the problem, and that includes, among others, increasing the number of coast guards to help deter and combat piracy within its own territorial waters.
We are now monitoring quite well. I've been using also satellite or whatever. But at the end, even you do something like that, you have to have also the strong coast guard in that area in order to monitor everything. Also to monitor your own fishermen in the area. So that's, I think, have to be one system. So we are preparing that one. Hopefully, you can see much better starting, I think, middle of this year onward.
While we can recognize that this as a spike, should the country do more, we also have to understand why a crime at sea occurs, because sea robbers will have to look for alternative income source. And I have to stress the fact that all these crimes are petty theft in nature that targets ship stores, ship spares, or from the big ship, such as like the bulk carrier and tankers, or scrap metals from the tug and barges to sell to the black market in the region. Unlike the more severe incident that we have observed in Gulf of Guinea and in Somalia waters at one point in time, where pirates actually hijacked crew for ransom and took lives as well. So the incidents in our waters is more petty theft in nature, but that does not mean that the countries will rest on our laurels.
Security analysts say the littoral states, Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia would have no choice but to up their game. Otherwise, these acts of piracy will simply spiral out of control as the economy worsens, just like in 2015. At that time, more than 100 attacks were conducted in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, causing a deep concern among countries in the region over disruptions to the sea lines of communications and maritime trade. But will Southeast Asia replace Africa as the hotbed of piracy? And will the Somalia type of attacks, which include the hijacking of ships, hostage-taking and kidnapping for ransom, be replicated in this region?
I think it's pretty unlikely that what's currently going on in Indonesia is a precursor to a Somalia-type event with respect to maritime piracy. The fact of the matter is that, right, in the case of Somali piracy, this was occurring amidst a state where central authorities have not been capable of going and extending sort of control into most parts of the country for decades, right, when piracy truly kicked off in the later part of the aughts. Indonesia, though it may have many challenges and the central government may have difficulties at times going and exercising control in various parts of the archipelago, there are vast differences here between Indonesia and the challenges it faces and Somalia and the challenges of reconstituting a failed state.
What happened in the Indian Ocean off of Somalia could not really happen in the Singapore Straits. One reason is the Indian Ocean is a vast area, far larger than the tiny, by comparison, Singapore Strait. Patrolling such an area of the Indian Ocean, even if you brought all of the world's navies together, is a challenge. The navies of Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia can manage the smaller area of Singapore Strait. The second part is, the problem in Somalia was you had a failed state, which is certainly not a problem for the Singapore Strait. Here you have 3 functioning countries that have the resources to enforce the law. So you don't have the risk of things reaching this level that you saw off of Somalia. And then the third part is the crimes being committed in this part of the world, in specifically the Singapore Strait. It's not being committed by fundamentalists or extremists. It's crime in the true sense of the word, to get cash, to convert spare parts or supplies into cash. There is no political or insurgency factor there.
However, the region will be in real danger if these pirates are allowed to roam the sea unchallenged. Once they become influenced by extremist ideas, the challenge would be far more difficult to overcome. The Abu Sayyaf terrorist group is a case in point. Since its inception in 1989, the group has carried out a series of bombings, abductions, murders and extortions to further its ideological objective of creating an Islamic state in this region through acts of violence.
Incidences in the Sulu and Celebes Sea started with petty theft, just theft of spare parts from engine rooms. But then it evolved, it escalated, people got more brazen, and they became a conduit for, like a funding conduit for the Abu Sayyaf group, because the Abu Sayyaf realized that through maritime piracy, they are able to fund their operations on land. And that's what I'm worried about in the Singapore Strait. If that we are too complacent, it might evolve into a bigger monster with bigger ramifications, perhaps even links to terrorist groups. I would not be ruling that out at all. Yeah.
The question is, how can this be avoided? Who should take the leading role in protecting the Straits of Malacca and Singapore from the marauding pirates? COVID-19 is regarded as the biggest threat facing the world to date. Not only has the pandemic devastated lives and caused victims to fall very ill, it has also ravaged global economies. Even the shipping industry is not spared. The substantially lower global economic growth has led to lower demand for movement of goods around the world. The gloomy economic scenario is also expected to cause a lot of financial hardship to many people as businesses collapse and jobs are harder to come by. and that could potentially lead to the rise in the incidence of piracy in the region, as recent developments seem to indicate. That has made it more urgent for all the littoral states, Singapore, Malaysia and Indonesia, as well as the various stakeholders to remain vigilant and step up the fight against piracy to help ensure safe navigation through the important waterway.
Many of these sea robbers operate using high-speed fishing boats, what we call the sampans, in our region, and this can travel at a top speed of more than 30-40 knots, which can outrun any law enforcement ships at sea. So it is very challenging for any law enforcement agencies, including the Coast Guard or the navies, to effect operational arrest at sea, and more effectively is to conduct the investigation on land and effect the arrest on land. And this is where the cooperations from the shipping industry is critical.
From its control room at the Changi Naval Base in Singapore, Navy and maritime security personnel from 20 countries work together at the International Fusion Center. It's a regional maritime center which monitors the movements of ships around the world, informs the relevant parties when a ship has been hijacked, secures its location and points to where it's heading. Established in 2009, the IFC also allows maritime security information to be shared across countries.
Over the last 10 years, we have first established a wide spectrum of operational linkages worldwide. And these account for 97 linkages from 41 countries across all continents. And this is important for us because we can push or pull information with our MASEC partners so that we can effect operational queuing should an incident happen at sea in our region.
So far, this information sharing has helped reduce the number of attacks in the region. Back in 2009, the numbers went down to as low as 47. The number of attacks, however, continued with 104 attacks in 2015 before they plunged to just 17 between 2016 and 2018. The attacks, however, went up last year with 31 incidents, and the upward trend continues of late. With security analysts pointing fingers at perpetrators from Indonesia, should Jakarta do more to stem the tide of piracy in this region?
It's always possible to allocate more material, more manpower towards surveillance, towards intelligence, towards suppression efforts. It is to say, though, that Indonesia no doubt already does play an active role. If it did not, if it were purely rhetoric, right, then you would have a much greater issue with piracy than you actually observe. However, there's always more that can be done.
Generally speaking, a lot of countries would like their neighbors to do more. However, one must always remember the reality on the ground. If you remember how many islands Indonesia has, patrolling all of those waters, patrolling all of those islands is not an easy task. Also, in terms of capacity, how much budget is available to fund different initiatives?
Maritime security specialist Secure State is one of a few firms in Asia which provides protection against the threat of sea piracy on board a vessel around this region, and it knows the risks pretty well.
Now, adversaries are everywhere along Straits of Malacca, Singapore Straits, and Indian Ocean, and all the way to Red Sea or even Persian Gulf. So when vessels are being attacked, they are left to defend themselves. So there is a need to be armed, at least equally, and it is only a deterrent, not to kill anybody.
Fire now, breaking off! Fire moving away! Okay, stand by,
The teams that we have are all ex-military, some are from ex-special forces, and we will want to have the cream of the crop, not just any military guy. so that they know what is at stake, and this is real. Life at sea is really serious and dangerous.
But even if the littoral countries want to step up surveillance in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, there's still one unresolved issue. It's the operational procedure called hot pursuit. The procedure allows for law enforcement officers from either Indonesia or Singapore to cross the maritime border to pursue pirates. But in practice, the policy has its own limitations due to sensitivities over sovereignty issues. Enforcement officers from another country only have limited hot pursuit rights when entering the sovereign waters of another participating country.
One of the things that the governments can do is to perhaps temporarily ignore the imaginary line that separates the territories of my country and yours. Okay, you got to remember that the pirates, they are not obeying this particular line. So why are our law enforcement authorities expected to obey this imaginary line if they are not? And how are they supposed to do their job? Yeah, so this is a very instrumental part of hot pursuit, in my opinion. Yeah, so because of this imaginary line, we are not yet able to materialize hot pursuit operations. If a perpetrator were to cross the line, the law enforcement authorities on one side is not able to follow up.
I believe all three littoral states should act on this, or in fact they are acting, but it may be a bit slow as far as the Indonesia aspect is concerned because of the size and the area they have to cover.
Indonesia says it is in the process of modernizing its naval fleet to protect its maritime borders against possible intrusion and to combat acts of piracy.
We have planned to add a number of ocean-going frigate, ocean-going coast guard in order to play their more active activities in the open ocean. Yeah. You will see now new frigate soon, the ocean-going 138 meters. Right now we have only 105 meters. Yeah. We'll see Indonesia changing for the next 5 years. Much better than today.
But some analysts believe that while such efforts will help boost Indonesia's naval capabilities, it may have little effect in curbing piracy activities.
I am aware of those modernization of the Indonesian Navy. However, what the minister was referring to are actually frigates, and these are surface combatants that are more suited to areas that are further out at sea. If you were to go against maritime pirates, you don't go against them with frigates. You will pursue them with patrol vessels. Those are the kind of vessels that we need in this part of the world. So I am doubtful as to how the addition of 138-meter frigates will improve the maritime security situation in this part of the world.
My recommendation is to continue to exercise vigilance, stay alert when transiting some of these known hotspots, like at the east of Karimun and North Batam in the Singapore Straits, and to adopt the best management practices, what we call the BMP5 that the industry is very aware of. Continue to maintain communication and report to the local authorities like the Singapore Vessel Traffic Information System, VTIS, and provide important and timely report should an incident happen on board their ships, so that the right responses can be effected.
What does it take to eradicate piracy? Acts of piracy or sea robberies have become a perennial problem to the maritime security in the region, especially now with the global economies struggling to overcome the impact of COVID-19. Will the deadly pandemic drain governments of their national resources and distract them from dealing with the growing problem within their own territorial waters? No one knows.